The dust raised by the luxury car's tires had barely settled when Playboy Nito, a cynical smile playing on his lips, observed the frail figure of his blind grandmother huddled by the side of the deserted road. To him, she was merely an obstacle, a burden preventing his access to the much-desired inheritance. With a final gesture of contempt, he flung the old woman's cane far away, into the dry brush, sealing the fate that nature in its relentless coldness was meant to fulfill. The grandmother, disoriented and alone, reached out into the void, feeling only the heavy silence of abandonment. But what Nito didn't know was that, in the depths of that forgotten landscape, an ancient and mystical force had already awakened. A white glow, almost ghostly, emerged from the vegetation, and a rare albino lion, with eyes that seemed to carry the wisdom of ages, observed the scene. It was no ordinary predator, but an unexpected guardian, and the cane, thrown with such cruelty, would be the first link in a savage justice. The roar of the engine faded into the distance, carrying with it the last hope of aid, the last flicker of humanity Playboy Nito still pretended to possess. To him, the rearview mirror showed only a diminishing speck on the horizon, irrefutable proof of his newfound freedom. A smile of satisfaction, almost a sneer of triumph, curved his lips as he sped away, leaving behind not just his blind grandmother, but also years of responsibility and the weight of an inheritance that now seemed within his grasp. The inheritance, the money, the luxurious life he so craved, all of it was a step away, free from the burden of an old woman who, in his distorted view, was merely an impediment. He did not look back with regret, only with the cold certainty that he had done what was necessary. Meanwhile, by the scorching roadside, the grandmother's world dissolved into a whirlwind of sounds and sensations. The scent of dust and dry brush invaded her nostrils. The sun's heat punished her wrinkled skin, and the silence that followed the car's engine was more deafening than any scream. She reached out, searching for the familiar touch of her cane, her only guide, her link to reality. But the void answered. Panic, a cold and paralyzing wave, surged up her spine. She was alone, blind, abandoned in the middle of nowhere, a minuscule and fragile dot in the relentless immensity of the desert. Hot tears streamed down her temples, mixing with sweat as hopelessness threatened to engulf her completely. But the desert, in its apparent indifference, held secrets that human logic could not comprehend. The white glow that had emerged from the vegetation was no mirage. It was the manifestation of an ancestral force, an unlikely guardian. The albino lion, with its immaculate coat that seemed to absorb and reflect the sunlight, moved with a silent and powerful grace. Its eyes, a translucent, almost ethereal blue, fixed upon the cane, thrown with contempt. There was no hunger in its gaze, nor the predatory ferocity common to its species, only an intensity that seemed to scrutinize the soul of things. With slow and deliberate steps, the majestic feline approached the dry brush. The rustle of leaves beneath its paws was almost inaudible, a whisper in the vastness. It lowered its head, and with a surprising delicacy for a creature of its size, picked up the cane with its mouth. The contrast was shocking. The polished, worn wood, a symbol of human fragility, now rested between the sharp teeth of a supreme predator. The cane, once an instrument of abandonment, transformed in the lion's jaws into an artifact of a greater purpose. The lion raised its head, the cane firmly held, and turned towards the huddled figure of the old woman. Its blue eyes, previously fixed on the object, now turned to the grandmother, a silent reading of her pain and helplessness. The grandmother, sensing the change in the atmosphere, the slight displacement of air, the closer rustling, trembled. Her heart beat erratically, a drum of fear in her chest. What creature was approaching? Was this the end? She raised a trembling hand as if to ward off whatever it was, but the touch that came was not that of sharp claws, nor of a hungry mouth. It was a gentle, soft, yet firm push of the cane's tip against her outstretched hand. The grandmother blinked, confused, and her fingers instinctively closed around the familiar wood. The strong, earthy scent of a wild animal invaded her nostrils, but strangely, there was no terror. There was a presence, a force, that did not seem hostile. She clutched the cane, feeling the warmth of the lion's mouth through the wood, a bizarre and inexplicable connection. The lion did not release the cane. Instead, it held it firmly, and with a slow, calculated movement began to move, gently pulling her along. The grandmother, still in shock, felt the cane move away and without fully understanding allowed herself to be guided. It was a primal instinct, a surrender to the only thing offering her direction in that moment of chaos. The albino lion, king of the savannah, had become her guide, her unlikely seeing-eye companion, a beacon of hope amidst the darkness of her blindness and abandonment. Far away, playboy Neto, already miles distant, cast a last fleeting glance in the rearview mirror. His grandmother's figure had completely vanished, swallowed by the landscape. A feeling of relief, almost euphoria, washed over him. He was free. But then something caught his eye. A white speck, almost imperceptible against the desert's ochre, seemed to be moving on the road in the same direction as him. It was large, too large to be a common animal of the region. A shadow of doubt, a shiver of uncertainty ran down his spine. He shook his head, dismissing the image as a trick of the light, an illusion created by the heat. But the lion, with the grandmother in tow, had already charted its course. Its blue eyes, now fixed on the distant speck of the fleeing car, gleamed with cold determination. The hunt had begun, and the predator, this time, sought not food, but justice. The villain's car, unknowingly, was already trapped in the sights of a savage destiny. Neto's euphoria, initially, was almost palpable. The luxury car's air conditioning filtered out the oppressive desert heat, and the loud music drowned out any trace of guilt. His grandmother's image, a tiny speck in the rearview mirror, had already dissolved into the horizon. Freedom. Finally, the inheritance would be his. But the road, once a symbol of escape, began to stretch strangely. That white speck. He had tried to ignore it, to attribute it to a mirage, to mental exhaustion, but it persisted, a pale, stubborn blur that seemed to maintain a constant distance, or worse, diminish with each passing minute. A cold shiver ran down his spine despite the car's chilled air. He accelerated, the engine roaring in protest, the landscape blurring past the windows. The speedometer read 90, 100 miles per hour. The car was powerful, built to devour miles. But when he dared another glance in the rearview mirror, the white speck was still there. Larger, more defined. It was no mirage. It was no trick of the light. It was something real, and it was coming for him. The cynical smile vanished, replaced by a grimace of confusion and, slowly, fear. What the devil was that? An animal? Impossible. No animal in that region, however large, could maintain that speed, that persistence under that scorching sun. Was it a car? No, the shape was wrong. Too low, too organic. He tried to turn on the radio, but static was the only response. His cell phone, no signal. The solitude of the deserted road, once an invitation to freedom, now transformed into a suffocating trap. Cold sweat began to trickle down his forehead. He increased his speed again, the car whining slightly on the curves. With each glance in the rearview mirror, the white figure became clearer. A powerful, unmistakable silhouette. A lion. An albino lion. For the grandmother, the world had narrowed to the touch of the cane in her hand and the steady rhythm of steps beside her. The lion, with surprising yet always gentle strength, pulled her along. There was no disordered haste, but a relentless determination in every movement. She felt the warmth of the animal's mouth through the wood, a living and strange connection. The scent of earth, dry brush, and unmistakably the wild musk of the lion filled her nostrils. Her other senses, sharpened by blindness and abandonment, picked up nuances Neto would never perceive. The rustling of bushes, the distant hum of insects, the heat of the sun on her wrinkled skin. But above all, she felt the lion's presence. It was not the threatening presence of a predator, but that of a guardian. There was an intelligence in its movements, a clear intention. It wasn't just walking, it was guiding. And somehow, she knew it was leading her away from danger, or perhaps towards a form of justice. With each step, the grandmother felt the lion's strength. It protected her from the sun with its own shadow at times, adjusted its pace when she stumbled. It was a bizarre dance, a symbiosis between human fragility and wild majesty. She heard the soft drag of the lion's paws in the sand, a gentle sound that contrasted with the force it exerted. It was the sound of a chase, she realized. The lion wasn't just saving her, it was leading her to where the car had gone. The relentless sun beat down on the road, creating heat waves that distorted the landscape. Neto, eyes fixed on the rearview mirror, felt panic tighten his throat. It was no illusion. The lion was there. And it was running. With impossible speed, a terrifying grace, the distance was visibly shrinking. What would he do? Stop? Flee? There was nowhere to go. The road was a straight line in the middle of nowhere. He tried to convince himself it was a nightmare, a hallucination. But the roar of his car's engine, now pushed to its limit, was real. The tremor of the steering wheel in his sweaty hands was real. And the image of the albino lion, with his grandmother's cane still in its mouth running towards him, was terrifyingly real. The lion, for its part, maintained its pace. Its powerful muscles worked in perfect synchronicity, propelling it forward. The cane, a symbol of its mission, was a beacon. The grandmother, though exhausted, felt the urgency in every step of the animal. She couldn't see, but she felt the road stretching beneath her feet, the dust rising. And suddenly, a sound. A sound she recognized with a shiver. The engine of her grandson's car, closer than before, much closer. Neto gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. The lion, now effortlessly visible in the rearview mirror, seemed to grow in size. Its blue eyes, once distant, now seemed fixed on him, burning with a supernatural intensity. It was no ordinary animal. It was a force of nature, a personification of vengeance. The car, once a sanctuary of his freedom, now seemed like a cage, and the predator was about to close in. Neto's cynical smile had been erased, replaced by pure, primitive terror. He was cornered, and the hunt, which he thought he had won, was only just beginning. Terror, once a seed, now sprouted in his chest, a thorny plant suffocating every breath. Neto, pale-faced and wide-eyed, couldn't tear his gaze from the rearview mirror. The image of the albino lion, running with a speed that defied logic and physics, was a persistent hallucination, a nightmare taking shape in the scorching reality of the desert. His muscles were tense, his knuckles white from gripping the steering wheel so tightly. The car, a symbol of his arrogance and freedom, now seemed like a metal coffin, and he, the cornered prey. He floored the accelerator, the V8 engine roaring in a desperate lament. The speedometer jumped to 100, 105, 110 miles per hour. The landscape blurred into an ochre and grey smear, the heat vibrating on the asphalt like an omen. But the lion did not yield. Its strides were a symphony of power and grace, every muscle working in perfect harmony. The distance between them, which he expected to see widen, stubbornly remained the same, or worse, shrank. It was as if the desert, in its vastness, had chosen an unlikely champion to impose its own justice. Sweat trickled down Nato's forehead, mixing with the chill of the air conditioning. He tried to turn on the radio again, desperate for any sound other than the roar of his engine or the terrifying silence of the chase. Nothing. Just static, a hiss that seemed to mock his helplessness. His cell phone dead, no signal. The solitude he had so desired to commit his cowardly act now turned against him, an absolute isolation that amplified his panic. For the grandmother, the world was a tapestry of sensations. The firm touch of the cane in her hand, the worn and familiar wood, now pulsed with the life of the lion that guided her. She felt the warmth of the animal's mouth through the wood, a bizarre and unbreakable connection. The wild scent of the lion, once an aroma of fear, was now a perfume of safety, of purpose. Her aged feet, sore and exhausted, moved at a steady pace, propelled by a force that was not her own. She couldn't see the lion, but she felt its presence with every step. The soft drag of its paws in the sand, the displacement of air beside her, the warmth of its massive body. There was an urgency in the animal's movements, a silent determination that pulled her forward. She heard the sound of her grandson's car engine, now closer, clearer than before. It wasn't the sound of a car driving away, but of a car being caught. A strange feeling of expectation, almost hope, began to form in her chest, mixing with exhaustion. The lion wasn't just saving her, it was leading her to the confrontation. Back in the car, Nato felt sanity slipping through his fingers. He looked in the rearview mirror once more, and what he saw made his blood run cold. The lion was closer than ever. It was no longer a speck nor a blur. It was a creature of flesh and blood, its immaculate white coat gleaming under the merciless sun. Its blue eyes, once a distant mirage, now burned with a supernatural intensity, fixed on him, as if they could see through metal and flesh straight into his guilty soul. And the cane, his grandmother's cane, still firmly held between the lion's teeth. It was a surreal, grotesque, and terrifyingly real image. That object which he had thrown away with contempt was now a symbol of his damnation, a beacon of justice, wielded by a beast. The lion seemed neither tired nor out of breath. Its run was a demonstration of inexhaustible power, a perfect machine of pursuit. Neto tried to swerve, to throw the car to the side, but the road was narrow, flanked by dry bushes and sharp rocks. There was nowhere to go. He was trapped. The lion, with an intelligence that terrified him, seemed to anticipate his movements, always staying on his heels. He could feel the vibration of the ground, the impact of the animal's strides, even inside the car. It was as if the desert itself was rising against him. Panic turned into despair. He screamed, a hoarse, voiceless sound that was lost in the roar of the engine. What would he do? Stop? Get out of the car? The idea was insane. That lion was no ordinary animal. It was not prey. It was a hunter, and he the hunted. The euphoria of freedom had dissolved, replaced by a primordial terror that paralyzed him. The lion, with the grandmother in tow, did not slow its pace. Its blue eyes did not waver. The cane, an unbreakable link, guided the old woman, while the animal guided its own destiny. The sound of Nito's car engine, now deafening to the grandmother, was proof that the distance was rapidly shrinking. She felt the lion's urgency, the determination in every step. They were closing in. Suddenly, the lion made a move. With an explosion of speed Nito hadn't imagined possible, the majestic feline lunged forward, drastically reducing the distance between them. In a matter of seconds, the lion was no longer just in the rearview mirror. It was there, alongside the car, running in perfect synchronicity with the luxury vehicle. Neto turned his head, and his eyes met the lion's through the side window. The animal's face, so close he could distinguish every white hair, every tense muscle, was a breathtaking and soul-chilling sight. Its blue eyes, once distant, now stared at him with calculated coldness, a silent promise of retribution, and the cane, still in its mouth, swayed slightly with the impact of the run, a cruel reminder of his crime. The car, once a refuge, was now a glass cage, and the lion, the jailer, had finally closed the net. The hunt had reached its climax, and Nito was, indeed, cornered. Neto's world narrowed to that terrifying image in the side window. The albino lion, a white spectre against the relentless blue sky, ran with frightening ease, its muscles rippling beneath its immaculate coat. Its blue eyes, once distant and enigmatic, were now wells of cold intelligence, fixed on him, reading every tremor of his panic. The cane, still in its mouth, swayed gently, a macabre pendulum of his own condemnation. The air inside the car became dense, unbreathable, despite the air conditioning being on full blast. The scent of new leather mingled with the cold sweat trickling down his spine. He tried to look away, but it was impossible. Those eyes held him, judged him. Nito stomped on the accelerator with a muffled cry, the V8 engine roaring in protest. But the car gained no more speed. It was as if the asphalt itself was holding him back, or as if the lion, with its mere presence, was distorting reality. The speedometer read 110, but it felt as if he were standing still, while the predator beside him was the only thing moving. He sharply turned the steering wheel to the right, hoping to shake off the lion, to gain a millimeter of space, but the beast reacted with supernatural agility. With a fluid movement, the lion leaned against the car, its massive shoulder brushing the bodywork with a harsh, metallic scrape. The impact made the vehicle sway violently, almost throwing it off the road. A visceral terror overwhelmed him. It wasn't just an animal, it was an unstoppable force, with a will of its own, a mission. The lion wasn't just running, it was guiding the car, pushing him towards a destiny Nito didn't want to face. He tried to turn left, forcing the lion away, but the animal only increased the pressure, its powerful paws digging into the ground, holding firm. The car whined, the rear wheels losing traction for an instant, and Nito felt control slip from his hands. For the grandmother, the dance became more intense. The lion, with the cane still in its mouth, changed its rhythm. It was no longer a constant run, but a series of abrupt accelerations and decelerations. She felt the animal's body tense, the strength of its jaw through the wood. The sound of Nito's car engine, once a distant hum, was now a deafening roar, so close she could feel the vibration in the air. And then, the sound of metal scraping, a sharp screech that made her bones tremble. The lion stopped, and she stopped with it, feeling the abrupt change in the terrain beneath her feet. The smell of dust and burnt rubber filled the air. Back in the car, Nito was in total panic. The lion had positioned itself in front of the vehicle, blocking the road, not running but standing still, majestic, with the cane still in its mouth like a scepter. Its blue eyes, previously fixed on the side, now stared at him through the windshield, a silent promise that there was nowhere left to go. The car stopped with a jolt, the tires singing a final lament before falling silent. The engine, still running, was the only sound breaking the oppressive silence of the desert. Nito released the steering wheel, his hands trembling uncontrollably. He was trapped. The lion, with a terrifying calm, took a step forward, then another, closing the distance between them. Every movement was deliberate, calculated. The animal seemed in no hurry. It was savoring the moment, the victory. Nito could see the gleam of saliva in the lion's mouth, the way the cane was held, without a scratch. It was a surreal, almost biblical image of a divine judgment in the middle of nowhere. He tried to turn on the radio again, desperate for any distraction, any sound other than the pounding of his own heart. Nothing, just the static hiss, an echo of his solitude. His cell phone, still dead. He was alone, completely at the mercy of that creature. Terror turned into a cold, paralyzing acceptance. He had dug his own grave, and now the gravedigger had arrived. The lion approached even closer until its muzzle was mere inches from the windshield. Nito could feel the warmth of its breath through the glass, the wild, powerful scent. The blue eyes pierced him, and he had the sensation that the lion could see every one of his thoughts, every one of his sins. And then the lion did something that made him scream, a hoarse, animalistic sound that was lost inside the car. With a slow and deliberate movement, the lion lowered its head, and his grandmother's cane, the object he had thrown away with such contempt, was gently placed on the car's hood. Not flung, but placed like evidence, a tangible reminder of his cruelty. The lion then stepped back, its eyes never leaving Nito's, and let out a roar, not a roar of wild fury, but a deep, resonant sound that made the ground tremble and the car vibrate. It was a roar of authority, of warning, of a final judgment. The grandmother, a few yards away, felt the lion's roar in her bones. It was a sound not of anger, but of power, of conclusion. She felt the lion move again, but this time not to run. It guided her forward, towards the sound of the car engine, towards the silence that followed the roar. She knew. She knew the confrontation had arrived. The lion had played its part. Now it was her turn. The smell of burnt rubber and hot metal was strong, and the silence, broken only by the car's engine and her own pounding heart, was proof that the hunt had ended. And justice, blind like her, was about to be served. Neto's world shattered. The lion's roar was not just a sound, it was a vibration that passed through the car's metal, his body's flesh, straight to the core of his soul. It was not a roar of the hunt, but of proclamation, of sentence, and the cane there on the hood was the material proof of his crime, a silent totem of his cowardice. His eyes, wide with terror, were fixed on the polished wood, then rose to the lion's blue eyes, which seemed to burn with an internal, relentless light. He was trapped, not just by the animal, but by the web of his own actions. The air conditioning, once a comfort, now blew a cold breath that couldn't dissipate the cold sweat trickling down his forehead. The car's engine, still running, was a distant hum, an echo of a freedom he would never feel again. The cold acceptance that had dominated him moments before transformed into renewed panic, deeper, more desperate. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The lion was not a physical barrier, it was a moral barrier, a manifestation of everything he had tried to bury. He tried to move his hands, but they were glued to the steering wheel, trembling uncontrollably. The image of his grandmother, blind and helpless, falling in the dust, projected itself in his mind, amplified by the lion's imposing presence. The cane, now, was not just an object. It was the personification of the dignity he had stolen, the trust he had betrayed. Meanwhile, a few yards away, the grandmother felt the ground beneath her feet. The lion, her silent guide, had changed its pace. There was no longer the urgency of the chase, only a steady, deliberate march. She felt the animal's presence beside her, the warmth of its body, the texture of its fur, lightly brushing her outstretched hand. The roar, which had made her bones tremble, now resonated in her memory like a final note, an exclamation point to the end of a journey. The smell of burnt rubber and hot metal was unmistakable, and the silence that followed the lion's roar was proof that the car was stopped. She knew she was close. Her other senses, sharpened by the darkness, guided her. The sound of the car engine, a constant murmur, was a beacon. The scent of gasoline and oil, mixed with the smell of desert dust, led her forward. She felt the vibration of the ground, the subtle change in the earth's texture beneath her feet. The lion led her with terrifying precision, not pushing her but guiding her, one step at a time, as if it knew exactly where she needed to be. With each step, The tension in the air increased, palpable, almost electric. She could feel Nito's presence, the aura of his fear, even before she was within reach. From inside the car, Nito watched the scene unfold in slow motion. The lion, with unwavering majesty, retreated slightly from the hood, but its blue eyes remained fixed on the windshield, a silent guardian. And then he saw her. His grandmother's figure, emerging from the desert heat haze, guided by the white beast. She was calm, serene, her head slightly raised, as if listening to a melody only she could hear. There was no anger on her face, only a quiet determination that terrified him more than any scream. The lion led her directly to the driver's door. Every step she took was a blow to his chest. He wanted to scream, wanted to start the car and flee, but he was paralyzed. His muscles wouldn't respond. He was a statue of terror and guilt. The grandmother reached out, and he saw her pale fingers touch the chrome door handle. There was no hesitation, no surprise, just the firm, familiar touch of a hand he had pushed into oblivion. The sound of cold metal against her skin was an electric shock to him. She didn't try to open the door. She simply touched it, as if confirming his presence. The lion beside her let out a deep sigh, a guttural sound that was not a roar, but a warning, a reminder of its constant vigilance. Its blue eyes now were divided between Nito and the grandmother, as if it were both judge and executioner. The grandmother then turned slightly, her face pale and sun-marked, but her lips moved. She wasn't looking at him, but at the void ahead, as if speaking to the desert itself. Her voice, once fragile and trembling, now carried a strength he had never heard. "Neto," she said, and the word echoed in the oppressive silence. "I know you're in there." The sound of his name pronounced by her was like a knife to his heart. He wanted to shrink away, to hide, to disappear, but there was nowhere to go. The lion, with its imposing presence, ensured that. He was naked, exposed, beneath the merciless gaze of the sun and the predator's blue eyes. The hunt had ended, yes, but the judgment was only just beginning, and the judge, blind but with clearer sight than ever, was ready to deliver her sentence. The smell of burnt rubber and hot metal still hung in the air, a persistent reminder of the path that had led him there. And the silence, broken only by the car's engine and the frantic pounding of his own heart, was proof that justice, finally, had arrived. The air inside the car became dense, almost solid, suffocating him. The name Neto reverberated in his ears, not as a sound, but as an accusation. He felt his blood run cold in his veins, his heart beating like a war drum against his ribs. Cold sweat trickled down his back, and the steering wheel, once a refuge, now seemed an instrument of torture. His hands glued to it by an invisible force. He couldn't move, couldn't speak. It was as if his grandmother's words had tied his tongue, petrified his limbs. Outside, the grandmother remained in her position, her hand still on the door handle, as if testing the solidity of reality. Her eyes, veiled by blindness, were fixed on a point beyond the windshield, but he knew she saw him. She saw through flesh and metal, straight into the rot in his soul. The lion, majestic and motionless, was the shadow of his conscience, the guardian of an improvised court in the middle of the desert. Its blue eyes, once a mirror of the sky's vastness, were now wells of relentless judgment. "I know you're in there," she repeated, her voice softer this time, but with a resonance that cut through the air. "And I know what you did." Every word was a blow, a hammer strike to his armor of denial. He tried to swallow, but his throat was dry, scratchy. A faint moan escaped his lips, a sound of despair that was lost in the engine's hum. He wanted to beg, wanted to lie, wanted to justify, but the words refused to come. The truth, naked and cruel, was there, exposed by the merciless sun and the terrifying serenity of the woman he had tried to destroy. The grandmother then removed her hand from the door handle, not with anger, not with haste, but with a deliberation that disturbed him even more. She turned slightly, and the lion, with an almost imperceptible movement, adjusted its position as if in tune with her every intention. The cane on the hood gleamed under the sun, a beacon of his betrayal. "You thought I was a burden, didn't you, Nato?" Her voice was a whisper, but every syllable was clear, laden with an ancient pain. "You thought I was an obstacle to your freedom, to your wealth." He closed his eyes, but the images persisted. The dust rising, her body falling, the cane flying into the brush, the smell of burnt rubber and hot metal mingled with the scent of his own bile rising in his throat. He felt the urge to vomit, to purge the guilt that gnawed at him. "But freedom, my dear, is not found in the absence of responsibilities," she continued, and he opened his eyes, unable to look away. "It is found in dignity, in truth, in the courage to face the consequences of your actions." The lion let out a deep sigh, a sound that seemed to agree with her words, an echo of the desert's ancestral wisdom. Its blue eyes did not waver, fixed on him, a silent and powerful sentinel. The grandmother reached out again, but this time not for the door handle. She extended it towards the lion, and the beast, with surprising docility, lowered its head. Her pale fingers brushed the animal's soft white fur, a touch of trust and gratitude that shocked him to the core. It was a scene that defied all logic, all understanding of the world he knew. A blind woman, guided by a wild predator, confronting her own flesh and blood. "This animal," she said, her voice now tinged with a reverence he had never heard, "would have shown me more compassion and loyalty in a few hours than you have in an entire lifetime." The humiliation struck him like lightning. It wasn't her anger that broke him, but the calm, unquestionable truth of her words. He was a coward, a monster, and she, blind and abandoned, had found a guide, a protector, where he had failed. The lion, as if understanding the weight of the words, raised its head and let out a low growl, a sound that was not threatening but a warning. Its blue eyes gleamed with an intensity that seemed to penetrate the windshield glass, piercing his soul. The grandmother then took a step back, and the lion followed her, keeping her protected. She didn't move away completely, just retreated enough so that the driver's door was visible, a barrier between them that seemed insurmountable. "You have a choice now, Nato," she said, and her voice, though still calm, carried an unwavering firmness. "You can remain trapped in your own darkness, or you can begin to see the light." He looked at the cane on the hood, then at the lion, and finally at his grandmother's pale face. The desert sun burned, the car's engine hummed, and the silence between them was filled with the promise of a judgment he could no longer postpone. Justice, blind and guided by a wild heart, was there, awaiting his answer. And he knew, with terrifying certainty, that escape was no longer an option. The air inside the car was no longer just dense, it was an invisible wall, suffocating him with the promise of a truth he could no longer ignore. His grandmother's words, "You have a choice now, Nato. You can remain trapped in your own darkness, or you can begin to see the light," reverberated in his mind, not as an echo, but as a hammer striking his conscience. He felt sweat trickling down his forehead, salty and cold, mixing with the dust that had accumulated on his skin. The steering wheel, once a symbol of control and escape, was now a shackle, his hands glued to it by a force that was not physical but moral. His eyes, wide with terror, fixed on the windshield, but didn't truly see the desert. They saw the image of himself, a distorted reflection of a man who had lost his way. The lion, majestic and motionless, was the personification of his judgment, its blue eyes piercing Nito's soul, stripping bare every lie, every cowardice, Beside the beast, his grandmother remained, a figure of unwavering serenity. She didn't pressure him with words, but with her presence, with the calm of one who had already traversed hell and returned, guided by a light he in his darkness could never have imagined. The car's engine, a constant hum, was the only soundtrack to his torment, a persistent reminder of the passing time, of the decision that needed to be made. Every second felt like an eternity, stretching out, tormenting him. He tried to breathe deeply, but the air seemed thin, heavy with guilt. A knot tightened in his throat, preventing any sound, any pretext, any excuse he might try to formulate. His grandmother's words had cut off all his escape routes. The cane, still on the hood, gleamed under the merciless sun, a beacon of his betrayal, a silent testament to his cruelty. Neto looked at it, then at the lion, and finally at his grandmother's pale, sun-marked face. There was no anger in her blind eyes, only a depth of understanding that terrified him more than any threat. She saw him, not with her eyes, but with her soul, and what she saw was the naked, raw truth of his character. He felt a tremor run through his body, a chill that came not from cold, but from fear and shame. The image of her falling in the dust, the sound of the impact, the cane flying into the brush, all of it replayed in his mind, a private horror film. And now she stood there, with the albino lion by her side, a guardian of a wild and relentless justice. The grandmother took a step forward, a slow and deliberate movement, and the lion, in perfect synchronicity, accompanied her. She didn't approach the car door, but stopped a few yards away, as if giving him space to breathe, to think, to decide. Her lips moved again, and her voice, a whisper that the desert seemed to amplify, reached his ears. "Darkness, Neto," she said, "is a lonely place, a place where you hide from yourself and where the truth cannot reach you." He closed his eyes again, squeezing them shut, as if he could erase the scene, erase himself. But her voice followed him, penetrating the darkness of his eyelids, painting vivid images of his own misery. He felt a warm tear trickle down his face, the first in years, a tear of despair and regret. The lion let out a low growl, a sound that was not threatening, but of an imposing patience, as if waiting, observing the unfolding of an ancient drama. Its blue eyes, fixed on Neto, were like mirrors of the sky, reflecting the vastness of his own insignificance. Neto opened his eyes. There was nowhere left to run, neither within himself nor outside. The choice was there, before him, as real as the sun's heat and the desert dust. To remain in darkness meant living with guilt, with fear, with solitude. To see the light. What did that mean? It meant facing, it meant admitting, it meant changing. He moved his hand slowly away from the steering wheel. His fingers trembled as they touched the door handle. It was not a movement of escape, but a movement of surrender, of a painful recognition that the hunt had ended, and he himself was the hunted. The sound of cold metal against his skin was a shock, but this time not of terror, but of a strange and terrible liberation. The grandmother, as if sensing the change in his heart, let out an almost inaudible sigh. The lion, for its part, raised its head slightly, its blue eyes still fixed on the car, but with an intensity that seemed to have softened, as if the first crack in Neto's armor had been noticed. He didn't open the door. Not yet. But his hand was there, on the handle, a gesture of hesitation on the threshold of a monumental decision. The desert awaited, the lion awaited, and his grandmother, with the infinite patience of one who had already lost everything and found a new guide, awaited, light or darkness. The choice was his, and its weight was almost unbearable. The desert awaited, the lion awaited, and his grandmother, with the infinite patience of one who had already lost everything and found a new guide, awaited, light or darkness. The choice was his, and its weight was almost unbearable. Neto's trembling hand still rested on the cold door handle, a tenuous link between the metallic refuge of the car and the relentless vastness of the truth outside. Every beat of his heart sounded like a war drum, echoing in the oppressive midday silence. He felt sweat trickling down his back, a salty river of anguish that mingled with the scent of old upholstery and dust. Darkness, he knew, was familiar. It was the hiding place where he had nestled for years, justifying his actions, ignoring the pain of others. Inside, he was the king of his own deceit, surrounded by ghosts of ambition and selfishness. But his grandmother's voice had pierced that fortress, and the lion, with its blue eyes like the endless sky, had dismantled his defenses brick by brick. Darkness now seemed like a tomb, and he, a living corpse, suffocating. And the light? The light meant facing the reflection he so feared. It meant admitting the cruelty, the cowardice, the monstrosity of his actions. It meant seeing the pain he had caused, not through a veil of self-deception, but with the brutal clarity of the desert sun. The light promised redemption, perhaps, but first, it promised excruciating pain, a purging of the soul he didn't know if he could endure. His eyes fixed again on the cane, still on the hood, a simple wooden stick, but now laden with overwhelming symbolism. It was the object he had thrown into the brush, the material proof of his betrayal. And it was the object the lion had rescued, transforming itself from predator to guardian, from beast to guide. The irony was a bitter poison in his mouth. The lion, sensing the tremor in Neto's hand, let out a low growl, almost imperceptible, but which reverberated in the young man's chest like distant thunder. It was not an explicit threat, but a reminder that patience had limits and that justice, though blind, was not deaf. Its blue eyes, once soft, now gleamed with renewed intensity, like two incandescent sapphires. The grandmother, for her part, remained motionless. Her figure, small and fragile against the immensity of the desert, radiated a strength Neto had never witnessed. She did not rush him, did not condemn him with words. Her presence was the very condemnation, the very choice. It was as if time had stopped, and the entire universe was in suspense, awaiting the next move of a man on the edge of an abyss. The air inside the car became unbearable. Every breath was an effort, every second a torture. Neto felt the urge to scream, to cry, to beg for forgiveness, but his throat was dry, his voice caught in a knot of shame. He had no more excuses, no more lies. There was only the truth, naked and raw, and the imperative need to face it. With a sigh that seemed to tear the last drop of air from his lungs, Neto finally moved his hand. His fingers gripped the door handle, and with a dry click that sounded deafening in the silence, he pushed it down. The sound of the mechanism unlatching was the sound of a barrier falling, of a prison opening. The car door creaked open, a metallic lament that echoed through the desert. Neto hesitated, his body tense, his eyes half closed as if he feared what he would find outside. The sunlight, previously filtered by the windshield, now flooded the vehicle's interior with dazzling intensity, revealing every particle of dust suspended in the air, every flaw in his skin, every stain on his soul. He pushed the door open a little further, and the desert heat enveloped him, a suffocating wave that contrasted with the car's lukewarm air conditioning. The scent of sand, dry brush, and wildlife filled his nostrils, a raw and untamed fragrance that was a reminder of how insignificant he was in that grand and indifferent setting. His eyes, still struggling to adjust to the brightness, sought out his grandmother's figure. She was there, a little closer now, a few yards from the open door. The lion beside her seemed to have relaxed minimally, but its blue eyes were still fixed on Neto, an eternal vigilance that allowed no slip-ups. Neto placed one foot out of the car, feeling the hot sand beneath the sole of his shoe. It was a small step, but a monumental one, a step out of his darkness into a light that promised to be painful, but perhaps, just perhaps, liberating. He rose slowly, his body stiff, his head bowed, unable to directly face the woman he had tried to destroy. The cane on the hood gleamed even brighter, a beacon of his shame. He felt the weight of his grandmother's gaze, a gaze that saw not with eyes, but with the heart, and that penetrated him to the core. The lion let out a deep sigh, almost a purr, but with a note of warning that made the hairs on Nito's neck stand on end. The hunt had ended, yes, but the judgment was only just beginning. He was there, exposed, vulnerable, and the desert, with its silent guardians, awaited his next action. The weight of the cane in his hands was a burden, but also an anchor. It was no longer the lightness of a disposable object, but the density of a life, of a dignity he had tried to crush. Every fiber of wood seemed to vibrate with the memory of abandonment, and at the same time, with the promise of a new beginning. Nito felt cold sweat trickle down his back, his mouth dry, his heart beating like a war drum in his chest. His eyes, previously fixed on the sand, now dared to rise, meeting his grandmother's figure. She was there, a few yards away, small yet imposing. Her blind eyes, which once seemed empty, now radiated an inner light that pierced him, not with anger, but with a sadness that was sharper than any blade. Beside her, the albino lion remained in majestic stillness, its blue eyes like liquid sapphires fixed on Nito. There was no longer the explicit threat, but the vigilance was palpable, a constant reminder that justice, though patient, was relentless. Nito took another step, then another, the sound of his shoes in the sand seeming amplified by the oppressive silence. Every movement was a monumental effort, as if he were walking against an invisible current. The distance between them shrank, and with it the barrier of his lies and cowardice. He felt the sun's heat on his face, the scent of dry earth and the gentle fragrance of lavender that always accompanied his grandmother, a bittersweet mixture that evoked childhood memories of a time when he saw her as a safe harbor, not an obstacle. When he was just an arm's length away, Nito stopped. The cane, still in his hands, seemed to pulse. He slowly raised it, offering it to his grandmother. His hands trembled uncontrollably, and he felt a knot in his throat, words trapped. There was nothing to say that could express the depth of his regret, the shame that consumed him. The grandmother, as if sensing the movement, extended a hand. Her fingers, thin and time-marked, brushed the cane's wood. There was no haste, no hesitation, only the certainty of a gesture she had awaited. Nito, with a care he never imagined possessing, placed the cane in her hand. Their fingers touched for a brief instant, and Nito felt an electric shock, a current of emotions that passed through him. It was not just the physical touch, but the connection of souls, the breaking of a silence that had lasted too long. She held the cane, her fingers closing around the familiar handle. The lion, beside her, let out a deep sigh, almost a purr, and its blue eyes seemed to soften even further, as if a crucial stage had been reached. The grandmother, with the cane firmly in her hands, raised her head. Her blind eyes, though they couldn't see him, seemed fixed on his face, reading every line of guilt, every unshed tear. "The cane," she said, her voice a whisper that, in the desert silence, sounded with the force of thunder, "is more than a support, Nito. It is my sight. It is my freedom." Nito couldn't respond. Her words were a mirror, reflecting the monstrosity of his act. He had tried to steal not just her inheritance, but her sight, her freedom, her very essence. The truth was a blow, and he felt it in every fiber of his being. The tears, which he had suppressed for so long, finally began to flow, hot and salty, tracing paths in the dust and sweat of his face. He fell to his knees in the hot sand, his head bowed, his shoulders trembling. Pride, arrogance, indifference, all crumbled in an instant, replaced by overwhelming pain and genuine regret. He did not ask for forgiveness with words, but with the total surrender of his being. It was a silent yet profound cry, echoing the vastness of the desert and the smallness of his own soul. The lion, in a surprising movement, took a step forward, stopping mere inches from Neto. It did not growl, did not threaten. Instead, it lowered its head slightly, and its muzzle touched Neto's shoulder. It was not a touch of solace, but of recognition. It was as if the animal was confirming that the judgment had ended, and that the punishment in that moment was the very pain of truth. The grandmother, with the cane now firm in her hand, took a small step forward, guided by the lion. She stopped right beside Neto, who was still kneeling, his face buried in his hands. She did not touch him, did not reprimand him further. Her presence was enough. The desert, once a stage of cruelty, was now a sanctuary of confession. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple, as if the entire universe was observing that moment of catharsis. Neto felt the sun's warmth on his neck, the lion's scent nearby, the silence of his grandmother beside him. He had reached rock bottom, and the only way out was up, towards the light his grandmother had mentioned, the light of truth, of responsibility, and of the difficult, yet necessary journey of reconstruction. He knew that forgiveness would not be easy, perhaps never complete, but the first step had been taken. The cane, now back in its rightful place, was proof that even in the deepest darkness, the hope of a guide still existed. He needed to get up, not to run away, but to begin walking, guided by a new and painful understanding. Neto, kneeling in the sand, felt the weight of the world collapse on his shoulders. Tears washed away the dirt from his soul, but the stain of his actions remained, indelible. He had tried to destroy his grandmother's dignity, and now she stood there, a beacon of integrity amidst his own darkness. The lion's touch on his shoulder was not a comfort, but a visceral reminder that nature, in its wild and relentless wisdom, had been the instrument of his truth. He needed to get up, not to flee, for there was nowhere left to go, but to face it. To face the woman he had betrayed, the animal that had judged him, and above all, himself. With a muffled groan, Neto began to move. His muscles were stiff, the hot sand burning his knees through the fabric of his pants. Every fiber of his being resisted, wounded pride fighting a final, futile battle against overwhelming humiliation. But the image of the cane in his hands, the weight of that object he had thrown away like trash, propelled him. It was a weight he deserved to carry, a silent penance. Slowly, with his hands braced on the sand, he rose. The movement was clumsy, painful, but imbued with a newfound determination. He felt blood rush to his head, a momentary dizziness, but kept his eyes fixed on his grandmother's figure, like a shipwreck survivor seeking the shore. She was there, the cane firmly in her hand, the albino lion by her side, a silent and majestic sentinel. The setting sun cast long shadows, transforming the desert landscape into a painting of golden, orange, and purple hues. Neto, now standing, felt the dry desert wind on his face, a reminder of the world's vastness and indifference, but also of the small yet powerful bubble of humanity and redemption forming there in that isolated spot. His eyes, swollen and red, finally met his grandmother's face. There was no explicit anger, no fierce condemnation, but a depth of sadness that pierced him more than any scream. He couldn't hold her gaze. He lowered his head again, his shoulders slumped, the image of a broken man, but no longer empty. "Grandmother," he managed to whisper, his voice hoarse and choked with emotion. It was the first time he had called her that, with the reverence and the affection he had suffocated for years beneath layers of selfishness. The grandmother, as if sensing his complete surrender, took a small step forward, the lion following her with the grace of a phantom. She did not touch him, but her presence was an invisible embrace, an invitation to confession and healing. "Forgiveness. Neto," she said, her voice a thread of melody in the oppressive desert silence, "is not something one asks for. It is something one builds, brick by brick, with regret and action." Neto raised his head, his eyes seeking hers, even knowing she couldn't see him. I don't know how," he confessed, the brutal honesty of his words surprising even himself. It was the naked, raw truth. He had spent so long building walls around himself that he had forgotten how to build bridges. The lion, in an unexpected movement, turned its head and looked at Nito's car, still stopped a few yards away, the engine off, the doors open like wounds. It was a symbol of his aborted escape, of his attempt at abandonment. The animal let out a low growl, almost inaudible, but laden with meaning. It was a reminder that the journey was not yet over, that responsibility extended beyond the act of repentance. The grandmother followed the direction of the lion's gaze, as if she could see through its blue eyes. "The car," she said, her voice a little firmer, as if dictating a new destiny, "was the instrument of your cowardice. Now it can be the instrument of your redemption." Neto looked at the car. It was a luxury, a symbol of his empty and superficial life. Now it seemed like a metal monster, a silent witness to his crime. He understood. Redemption would not just be an apology, but a change of course, a reversal of values. He needed to use what he had to correct what he had done, to repair the damage. I'll take you back," Neto said, his voice gaining a little more strength, determination beginning to sprout in his chest like a seed in arid soil. "I'll take care of you, truly. I'll work. I'll do whatever it takes. I just want you to be well, for you to forgive me." The words trailed off, but the intention was clear, palpable. It was no longer about the inheritance, but about life, dignity, the love he had thrown away. The grandmother nodded slowly, a small, sad smile playing on her thin lips. "The road back is long, my grandson," she murmured, the wisdom of her years echoing in the air. "And the darkness of night is coming." Neto looked at the horizon. The sun was almost completely below the horizon, and the first stars began to dot the sky like diamonds scattered on dark velvet. The desert, once hot and vibrant, now prepared for the biting cold of the night. The threat of abandonment had been replaced by the threat of nature, but this time he was not alone. He had his grandmother and the albino lion, an unexpected guide for a journey he never imagined. He took a step towards the car, but stopped. He looked at his grandmother, a silent plea in his eyes. "Grandmother, do you need help getting to the car?" It was a simple question, but laden with immense meaning. It was the first act of genuine care in a long time, the first offer of support coming from a place of true concern. She extended her free hand, the one not holding the cane. Her fingers, thin and time-marked, waited. "Yes, my grandson," she said, her voice soft yet firm. "I do. And you? Do you need help finding the way?" Neto felt a warmth spread in his chest, something that was neither shame nor fear, but a spark of hope, a promise of healing. He approached, extended his hand, and with a delicacy he didn't know he possessed, held his grandmother's hand, their fingers intertwined, a link that had been broken and now, hesitantly, began to mend. The albino lion, observing the scene with its deep blue eyes, let out a soft purr, almost a murmur of approval. Its eyes, in the twilight, gleamed like beacons, guiding them to whatever came next. The journey back, both physical and spiritual, was only just beginning. and the desert night, with its dangers and its promises, awaited them. Neto knew the road would be arduous, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel the desire to flee. He felt the desire to guide, to protect, to redeem. Neto's hand, once so accustomed to gripping the steering wheel of sports cars or champagne flutes, now clasped his grandmother's with a delicacy that bordered on the sacred. Every step towards the car was a small victory against the inertia of his past, a silent penance in the sand that grew colder by the moment. The albino lion, its fur almost luminous in the twilight, walked a few yards ahead, its blue eyes like beacons, guiding them along an invisible yet undeniably present path. It was as if the animal was clearing the ground, warding off the hidden dangers of the approaching night. Neto watched his grandmother, her step slow but steady, the cane tapping the ground with a precision that defied her blindness. He felt the fragility of her bones beneath her wrinkled skin, and a knot formed in his throat. How could he have been so cruel, so blind to the dignity and strength that emanated from that woman? The image of her falling in the sand, the cane flying away, haunted him like a ghost. "Watch out for the rock, grandmother," he murmured, his voice still hoarse, but now laden with genuine concern. He gently pulled her aside, guiding her around a sharp boulder that was barely discernible in the growing gloom. She nodded, a silent trust in his touch. That simple gesture, her acceptance of his help, was a balm for his wounded soul. The car, a symbol of his escape and his cowardice, now seemed a refuge, a portal to redemption. As they approached, the lion stopped beside the passenger door, like a majestic doorman, its eyes fixed on Neto. There was no threat, only a silent expectation. The judgment had ended, but the vigilance remained. Neto opened the door with a muffled click that echoed in the desert silence. The car's interior, once a sanctuary of his selfishness, now felt cramped, suffocating. He leaned in, offering support to his grandmother. "Careful, grandmother. The step is a bit high." She extended her free hand, feeling for the doorframe, and then felt the seat. With a sigh, she sat down, her thin legs dangling for a moment before Neto helped them inside. He closed the door gently, the sound like a seal, a commitment. He walked around, the lion following him with the same silent grace, and sat in the driver's seat. The scent of new leather, of luxury, felt strange now, almost offensive. He inserted the key into the ignition, his heart pounding in his chest. What if the car wouldn't start? What if the battery was dead? The desert, with its relentless vastness, forgave no failures. He turned the key. The engine coughed once, sputtered, and then, with an encouraging roar, sprang to life. The dashboard lights came on, illuminating the interior with a soft glow. Neto looked to the side. His grandmother sat upright, her hands resting on the cane, her face serene in the gloom. Her eyes, though blind, seemed to see more than his. "The way back is more than a road, my grandson," she said, her voice calm, yet laden with a depth that made him shiver. "It is a choice made at every turn, every obstacle." Neto swallowed hard. He knew she wasn't just talking about the dark dirt road ahead. He turned on the headlights, and two beams of light cut through the darkness, revealing the dust and elongated shadows. In the rearview mirror, he saw the albino lion. The animal was standing a few yards behind the car, its blue eyes gleaming intensely in the dark, as if watching, waiting. I understand, grandmother," Neto replied, his voice almost a whisper. He placed his hands on the steering wheel, feeling the cold material beneath his fingers. That steering wheel, which once carried him away from his responsibilities, would now be the instrument of his return. He engaged the gear, and the car began to move slowly. Dust rose behind them, a ghostly cloud in the wake of the headlights. Neto looked again in the rearview mirror. The lion was no longer standing still. It was running alongside the car, maintaining a steady pace, its white figure almost blending with the dust and darkness, but always visible, always present. It was a guide, a guardian, a constant reminder of his promise. The tension in the car was palpable, not of fear, but of a solemn expectation. The grandmother, sensing the car's movement and perhaps the lion's presence, turned her head slightly towards the window. "It won't leave us," she said, a hint of wisdom and gratitude in her voice. "It will show us the way, even if we cannot see it." Nato felt a shiver. The road was dark, full of potholes and rocks, but he no longer felt the panic from before. There was a purpose, a direction. He drove with a caution he had never shown, every steering wheel movement calculated, every brake gentle. He was guiding, but he was also being guided. The desert night's cold began to penetrate the car, but Nato felt a strange warmth in his chest. It was hope. The hope that perhaps, just perhaps, he could begin to undo the wrong he had done. The journey would be long, the night would be dark, and the dangers of the desert were real. But for the first time in a long time, Nato was not alone in his darkness. He had his grandmother, the light of her truth, and an albino lion, an unexpected guardian angel running beside him, illuminating the path of his redemption. The road ahead was uncertain, but the direction, finally, was clear. The desert's darkness was a heavy cloak, and the car's headlights, once symbols of escape, were now Nito's only eyes in the relentless vastness. Every jolt, every stone that scraped beneath the tires was a reminder of the fragility of his journey. The albino lion, a solid mirage of hope, held firm beside them, its blue eyes cutting through the night like two small suns. Nato felt the animal's gaze, a constant vigilance that prevented him from swerving, from giving in to the panic that still lurked in the shadows of his mind. His grandmother's hand on his arm, a light yet firm touch, anchored him. She couldn't see the road, but she felt every movement of the car, every hesitation from Nato. "Haste is the enemy of the soul, my grandson," she murmured, her voice serene, yet with an authority Nato had never noticed before. "The way back is not a race, but a pilgrimage. Every step counts." Nato gripped the steering wheel, feeling cold sweat on his palms. He was accustomed to speeding up, to leaving problems behind in a cloud of dust and indifference. Now he was forced to slow down, to face the road and himself. The car, a luxury model, seemed out of place in that wild setting, its suspensions designed for smooth asphalt, not for the brutality of the dirt track. Every pothole was a punishment, every curve a test. Suddenly the albino lion, running with supernatural grace, slowed its pace and positioned itself slightly ahead of the car, its eyes fixed on something in the darkness ahead. Nato felt a shiver. The animal's instinct was undeniable. He stepped on the brake, and the car whined slightly, raising more dust. "What is it, my grandson?" the grandmother asked, her voice tense. She felt the change in movement, the abrupt stop. Nato squinted, trying to penetrate the darkness beyond the headlight's reach. The lion stood still, motionless, like a marble statue. Its blue eyes gleamed with an intensity Nato had never seen. There was something there, an invisible yet palpable danger. I don't know, grandmother," Nato replied, his voice a whisper. The lion stopped. "It seems there's something ahead." The silence that followed was filled only by the car's idling engine and the gently howling wind. Nato felt his heart pound in his chest. The desert was not just a place of abandonment, but of predators, of hidden dangers. He thought of wild animals, of snakes, of scorpions. His grandmother's vulnerability and his own struck him forcefully. The lion let out a low growl, almost inaudible, but laden with a primal warning. Its blue eyes moved, fixing on a specific spot to the right of the road. Nato followed the animal's gaze. Slowly, a shadow began to materialize in the gloom. It wasn't an animal. It was something larger, more threatening. A flat tire. No, not just a flat tire. There was scattered debris on the road, twisted pieces of metal, what appeared to be the remains of an accident. The lion, with a cautious step, circled the debris, looking at Nato as if instructing him to do the same. "It's an accident, grandmother," Nato said, his voice tense. "It looks like there's debris on the road." The grandmother sighed. "The desert doesn't forgive inattention, my grandson, nor haste, nor arrogance, but it offers a chance to learn, to see what truly matters." Nato swallowed hard. The lesson was clear. He had been inattentive, hurried, arrogant. He had caused his own moral accident. Now he needed to navigate through the wreckage of his own life. Carefully, he began to maneuver the car, following the lion, which moved with mesmerizing precision, swerving around obstacles invisible to Nato, but clear to the animal. The lion not only guided him, but protected him, anticipating dangers, showing the safest path. Nato felt a deep and unexpected gratitude for the animal. He, the playboy who despised nature, was being saved by it in its wildest and purest form. As the car passed the wreckage, Nato saw the carcass of a vehicle overturned, its tires in the air. It was a grim reminder of what could happen if he wasn't careful, if he didn't respect the road, the desert, life. The grandmother remained silent for a moment, then said, "There's more than just rocks and sand on this road, my grandson. There are stories, there are warnings, there are lessons." Nato nodded, though she couldn't see him. He was learning, he was seeing. With each mile, each obstacle overcome, the shell of his indifference cracked a little more. The desert's cold felt less biting, replaced by a strange warmth, a flame of purpose igniting in his chest. The albino lion, now once again beside the car, seemed more than a guide. It was a mirror, reflecting the purity and strength Nato had tried to destroy in his grandmother, and which he now desperately sought within himself. The night was still long, and the road uncertain. But for the first time, Nato felt he was on the right path, not fleeing, but returning. Returning to himself, to his grandmother, to the humanity he had abandoned. Redemption was not a destination, but the journey itself, and he was only just beginning to walk it, guided by a lion and the wisdom of a blind woman. Redemption was not a destination, but the journey itself, and he was only just beginning to walk it, guided by a lion and the wisdom of a blind woman. The night advanced, dense and cold, and the desert seemed to stretch infinitely, a purgatory of sand and shadows. Every kilometer covered was a battle, not against the road itself, but against the darkness that still tried to cling to Nito's heart. The car, an oasis of luxury amidst the wildness, was now just a shell, a means to an end he was only just beginning to comprehend. The albino lion, a silent sentinel, remained by their side, its run fluid and tireless, its blue eyes living beacons in the gloom were Neto's only compass. He felt the animal's presence, a primal force that prevented him from swerving, from giving in to the weariness that weighed on his shoulders. His grandmother, beside him, was a pillar of calm. Her hands rested on the cane, her face serene, as if the desert's darkness was just another familiar landscape to her blind eyes. "The desert's silence teaches us to listen, my grandson," she said, her voice a whisper that seemed to blend with the wind's howl. "To listen to what truly matters, what the haste and noise of the city prevent us from hearing." Nato swallowed hard. He was listening to the car's creak, the wind, his own heartbeat, and above all his grandmother's voice, which he had ignored for so long. With every jolt, every risky curve, he felt life's fragility, the precariousness of his own existence. The accident they had passed was a grim reminder, a mirror of his own moral fall. Suddenly the car's engine sputtered, once, twice. Neto felt a chill run down his spine. He pressed the accelerator, but the response was weak, hesitant. The dashboard lights flickered and the fuel gauge plunged to red, a late and cruel warning. Panic, which he thought he had tamed, threatened to resurface. "It can't be," he murmured, his voice choked. "Not now." The lion, as if sensing the imminent failure, slowed its pace and looked at the car, its blue eyes piercing the darkness with an almost supernatural intensity. The engine coughed one last time, a faint moan, and then fell silent. The car glided for a few more yards, propelled by momentum, before stopping completely, plunging them into a deep and absolute silence, broken only by the wind and the distant sound of some nocturnal animal. Darkness swallowed them. The headlights, now off, left an immense void. Neto felt cold sweat trickle down his forehead. He was stranded, with his grandmother, in the middle of nowhere. Despair threatened to overwhelm him. "What happened, my grandson?" the grandmother asked, her voice calm, though there was a note of concern. "We're out of gas, grandmother," Neto replied, his voice hoarse. He slammed his hand on the steering wheel, frustrated. "We're stranded. There's nothing for miles." The grandmother reached out and touched Nito's arm. Her touch was soft, yet firm. "There's nothing that cannot be overcome, my son. Just a new path to be found." Neto looked outside. The lion stood a few yards from the car, its eyes fixed on him. The animal let out a low growl, almost an invitation. It turned and began to walk slowly, looking back as if expecting them to follow. "It's calling us," the grandmother said, a certainty in her voice. "It will show us the way." Neto hesitated. Getting out of the car, in the midst of that impenetrable darkness, seemed insane, but staying there was a sentence. He opened the door, and the biting cold of the desert enveloped him. He helped his grandmother out, holding her carefully. She gripped the cane tightly, and the lion approached, rubbing its head against her hand, a gesture of affection and protection. "Come, my grandson," she said, her voice full of a courage Neto did not possess. "It will guide us." Neto slipped his arm under hers, feeling the light weight of her body. He leaned down and picked her up. She was surprisingly light, frail, but her inner strength was immense. The cane remained in her hand, a symbol of her autonomy. The lion watched them for a moment, and then turned, beginning to walk. The journey on foot was more arduous than Neto could imagine. Every step in the soft sand was an effort. The cold penetrated his bones, and weariness threatened to fell him. But he couldn't stop. Not with his grandmother in his arms, and not with the albino lion, a ghostly and inspiring vision leading the way. The animal seemed to know exactly where to go, swerving around rocks and bushes. Its blue eyes always ahead, but occasionally casting a glance back to ensure they were following. Hours dragged on. Neto felt his muscles burn, sweat trickling down his face, mixing with tears of exhaustion and perhaps regret. He thought of everything he had done, the cruelty of his intention, the indifference that had corroded him. And now he was there, carrying the woman he had tried to abandon, guided by an animal he had underestimated. The irony was brutal, but the lesson undeniable. "I'm so sorry, grandmother," he whispered, his voice choked, "for everything, for being so blind." The grandmother, nestled in his arms, caressed his face with a wrinkled hand. "Darkness makes us see, my grandson, and forgiveness is the light that guides us out of it." The lion suddenly stopped, its blue eyes fixed on a point on the horizon. Neto, his vision blurred by exhaustion, squinted, and then he saw a faint band of light beginning to emerge, announcing the dawn, and further distant a faint glow, the lights of a small town, a gas station, a sign of life. A wave of relief and overwhelming gratitude flooded Neto. He had made it. They had made it. The lion let out a low growl, almost a purr, and turned to them. Its blue eyes gleamed with serene satisfaction. It approached, rubbed its head against Nito's hand, then his grandmother's, a final, silent farewell, and then, with the same grace with which it had appeared, the albino lion turned and vanished into the gloom of the desert that was beginning to lighten, its white figure blending with the sand and the rosy dawn sky. Neto watched it go, a knot in his throat. The guardian angel, the unexpected guide, had fulfilled its mission. With his last remaining strength, Neto continued walking towards the distant lights. The sun began to rise, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple and revealing the immensity of the desert, now less threatening, more majestic. He felt the sun's warmth on his face, a warmth that seemed to wash away the coldness from his soul. They finally reached the roadside, where a solitary gas station stood. A car stopped, and a man came to their aid, shocked to see them there. Neto briefly explained the situation, omitting the darker details, but the truth was in his eyes, in his posture, in his grandmother, who was now safe in his arms. At the small town's hospital, after examinations and rest, Neto sat beside his grandmother's bed. She was fine, just tired. He held her hand, feeling her soft, wrinkled skin. "Grandmother," he said, his voice firm, yet laden with emotion. I don't care about the inheritance anymore. I'm going to take care of you. Truly. I'll work. I'll do whatever it takes. I just want you to be well, for you to forgive me." The grandmother squeezed his hand. Her blind eyes turned to where he was. A gentle smile appeared on her lips. "I already forgave you, my grandson, a long time ago. The important thing is that you forgave yourself, that you found your way back to yourself." Neto felt tears stream freely, not from sadness, but from relief, from redemption. He had been a playboy, a villain, a lost man. But the desert, his grandmother's wisdom, and the grace of an albino lion had shown him the way. He had lost everything he thought he had, but he had found something far more valuable, himself and his grandmother's unconditional love. The journey had not been to flee, but to return. And he was finally home.